Hello again, it's Michael from Mirrors of Consciousness and creator of the Orbifold Tarot. So we've gone now through the four elements in one video, an overview of the numbers without getting specific into any particular number, but the number cycle in another video. And we've gone over each individual number from ace to 10 in another video. I think that's it. So the next step is to actually see how that plays out in some actual readings. So in this case, I'm just going to use half the deck, the 40 minor arcana, so that we don't have to look at anything more complicated than what you've just learned in the minors. So I'll shuffle up the deck, and we'll draw a couple of 3 or 4 card readings, and I'll just show you how they play out with 3 or 4 cards at a time in each pure element. What is the most important here, I think, for you to observe and practice in process is 2 steps. 2 really important steps for reading, which are, first, what are the elements? So, how many of the elements show up? And this is going to be applicable later for when we add the other half of the deck. It's going to be really important. So first, what are the elements? How many of them show up in that 3 or 4 card reading? You can, of course, do more cards, but to keep it simple, we'll do 3 or 4 cards. So, how many elements are there? What are those elements? And what elements are missing? So that's step 1, is what are the elements? Step 2 is what are the numbers? Are there lots of low numbers? Are there lots of high numbers? Are there lots of middle numbers? Is there a fairly even distribution of all numbers? That sort of idea. So I'm going to stop the video and turn it around. I've shuffled my deck, and we'll just do a few 3 or 4 card readings to show you, and I'll explain them. Alright, so let's start with actually a couple of 3 card readings. There's card 1, card 2. Oh! And I didn't order the deck. I didn't put them in any particular order. These are fresh off the shuffling. So, first step. The reason I made a sound is because there were 2 10s coming up back to back, but that's step 2. So step 1 is, what are the elements? We have 2 fire cards, and we have 1 water card. Even still, just looking at the elements, what's interesting is that the elements border the water card, the water element. So that it's saying, if we look at our keywords from the elements, it's saying that we have action followed by sensation or feeling, and completed by action again. If we're reading it in a timeline, which is fairly easy for now, that kind of past, present, future, or current situation, what to do next. Of course, there's other ways to read that, but if we go, okay, action, feeling, action. Then we look at the numbers. That was the second part of the process. What are the numbers? Do numbers repeat? Yes. Here we have 2 10s. The number 10 repeats. So there's a feeling of there's completion near the beginning of this situation, and then some kind of fresh start, or near the beginning. There's some growth, but it's near the beginning of a different process, finishing the reading off. So we have a completion of action and a completion of sensation or feeling, and then a relatively newness in action here as well. That gives you an overview. of what the reading is about. And then we can just go layer by layer by layer deeper. So then we go, okay, not only is it near the end, but it's really truly the end of these two cycles, of the fire and the water cycle. So it could be not only a lot of action, a lot of stuff to do, a lot of tasks on the plate for that person or for that situation. But it can also be, like I said, about tens and completion of community, and it could be the ending of something that is ready to be started anew. So that's action, fire, will, desire, being complete, and possibly being completed in a community, being completed among others. Same thing with emotions, and actually that kind of makes sense. It depends on the situation again and the question, but it kind of makes sense that if you are near the completion of a task, of a set of actions, getting things done, there will likely be also an associated feeling of completion emotionally. If it's something that has required a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of doing to complete, a lot of investment of effort in fire, then that is usually also going to be accompanied by an emotional investment as well. People don't usually invest a lot of time and energy in doing things if they're not also emotionally interested or invested in the task. So just in that relationship between the two tens, there's a completion of doing and feeling, acting and sensation, of getting things done and being possibly relieved that the thing is over, but also kind of maybe emotionally anxious. There could be anxiety might be more of a fire thing, but anxiety could be a 10 of water thing, and so anxiety with 10 of water and 10 of fire, that combination of the two tens and those two elements could be a kind of anxiety, not the kind of anxiety necessarily that the person thinks about a lot, but the kind of anxiety that is felt in the body and is near a kind of relief and near a kind of change as that completes. It's like, oh, I'm going to be so relieved when this is over, that kind of idea. I'm going to feel so great when this is over, that kind of aspect. And then it ends. We have the two tens, and it ends. And then we get to a 3 of fire. So it ends, but it doesn't mean that the person is going to be out of work or out of things to do. There's still going to be tasks to be completed. There's still going to be some stuff to do. But the load is going to be much lighter. There's going to be a lot more movement. There's going to be a little bit more balance. There's maybe going to be a happy medium, remembering that 3s are compromise because they're the balance of two extremes leading to a third thing. So I didn't talk about elemental dignities, but fire and water, it doesn't take a genius to figure out fire and waters are opposite. So this 3 of fire, even though it's in the fire realm, it's still kind of in the action side, because we have these two opposites here, and because 3s are about the combination of opposites with a compromise, with a middle ground. The 3 of fire could be an actionable way, a doable way of merging these two opposites, of finding a way to reconcile these two opposites in a way that's maybe more manageable for the person. So that's 3-card reading number 1. We'll continue on. 8 of air, 2 of fire, and a 6 of earth. So, same process. What are the elements? We have one of three elements. What element then is missing? Water is missing. So in this particular three element reading, maybe the person is lacking emotion. There's not an emotional component to it, or because there's a high number of air, maybe there's too much going on consciously, and not enough going on subconsciously or intuitively. The person is trying to shape things with the conscious mind and not doing quite enough with intuition and their feelings. But that's a slightly more advanced stage of reading the element that's not there. Let's read the elements that are there, which are air, fire, and earth. So those are the three elements contained. We have thinking, doing, and being, or intellect, action, and experience or presence is another earth word that we can think of, or perseverance. And then second step, what are the numbers? We have actually all even numbers, 8 to 6. And it's a fairly healthy distribution of the numbers. We have a high number, we have a low number, and we have a medium intermediate number. So that kind of tells us something too about there's not it's not too far along or too close to the beginning in the process. We've got some things near the end, we've got some things near the beginning, and then a happy medium. And it could be different tasks. One task that is near the end of the thought process, the planning process is near completion, and the action, the person is starting to take action on that plan. But it hasn't really, the action phase, the doing stuff phase has not quite happened yet. It's just starting. Maybe they've taken some action, but not very much. And then 6 of Earth, we've got presence, being, experience, and resources. So maybe let's say if this is a project, which makes things easy to think of in terms of projects. It could be a relationship too, it could be lots of different things. But if it's a project, we've got, okay, we've planned the project well, we've planned it even to the point where it's very stable. We have that cube idea, 4 and 4. It's stable, it's solid, it's got height, width, and depth, and it's kind of box tight. It's a really good plan. It's maybe a little bit stuck. Maybe there's not enough room in the plan for variation, for possibilities of change, because different things can come up in a plan. You can plan well, but as life happens, different things can come up. So maybe the plan doesn't include those things. It's a bit too stuck in a box, but it's a good plan. It's a solid plan. We've taken some action, like I said earlier. And then 6 of Earth, you've got the resources to execute the plan. This is great. This is actually quite a complete, excellent reading. And not only do you have the resources in Earth to complete the plan, but there's a harmony. Remembering the 6 is a card of harmony. So you've got the physical material, the perseverance, the stability, the ground to execute this idea through action, and the resources in a harmonious way. You can also look in, this is a slightly further step of combining the 6 and the 2. 6 and 2 create 8. So this great plan, this cube plan, now can be expressed with a 2 and with a 6, And so this plan requires maybe not a lot of action, but maybe it requires a lot of resources. And so make sure that you've got those resources. Or it could be that the action is not quite well enough developed, and there's a bit of stagnancy, a blockage, not because of the number, but because of the element, because Earth is stable and solid and doesn't change a lot. So maybe it'll require some steady action in order to create change in the Earth element, in the stability. Nonetheless, the 6 is it has malleability, it has changeability. So anyway, it's actually a pretty positive result, I think. Depends, of course, on the situation and the context. Let's try a 4-card one now, and I think this will be the last one. I hope you're starting to get the idea. So we have, oh, that's interesting. Ooh, 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 fun. So we have, what are the elements? The elements, we have only 2 elements. In a 4-card reading, 2 elements is kind of a little bit unusual. Not as unusual as if we only had 1 element, but it's a bit unusual to have 4 cards and only 2 elements. There are also oppositional elements. We have 2 cards of the most subtle element, air, and 2 cards of the most dense element, earth. So that's kind of interesting. And the rhythm of the 2 elements goes back and forth. So perhaps if we had the order a little bit different, if it had been earth, air, air, earth, it might suggest that air, the thought realm, is contained within practicality, or is even maybe contained between the resources, or restrained by the resources, or perhaps the lack of resources. If we ignored the numbers for a moment, the balance of earth, air, air, earth might suggest that. But in this case, we had air, earth, air, earth. So it could be a situation of indecision between lofty ideas and earthbound practicality, and then a lofty idea and earthbound practicality. So it's kind of like an up-down, lots of opposition and change there, just in terms of the elements. Or the opposite interpretation, but still taking into consideration the elements, could be that it's a person that has an idea and develops the idea and has a way of making that idea a reality, practicality. And then from that practicality, the person has another idea or set of ideas and is able to make that a reality and make that practical as well. So there's some different possibilities just in terms of the elements. And again, it would depend on the reading, the context, the person in front of you, the question, the situation. So that's the first step of the elements. We can also look within that first step of looking at elements, what elements are not there. So water and fire are missing. Maybe this is a very practical and level-headed person. So practical is the earth, level-headed is the earthy aspect, level-headed is an earthy mind. But it's not a person that maybe has a lot of drive or personal will, because there's a lack of fire, and it's maybe not a person who has a lot of emotional investment. Maybe it's not that they're not emotional at all, but maybe they don't show their emotions, or they're not as well in touch with their emotions. They don't express their emotions. so air being expression, but lack of water or fire. They're not expressive of the emotions, they're not expressive of their desires, but they are expressive of what they can call into being, what they can create in a tangible way. They are maybe expressive of their experiences, remembering Earth is experience and being. So that's the first step, the elemental step. Second step is look at the numbers. So we have some interesting things with the numbers where we have a 3 and a 3, again bordering the two middle numbers. So 3s being about change, creativity, the middle ground, compromise, the Trinity. We have a Trinity at the beginning and a Trinity at the end. So maybe it's a person who's very much in touch with that idea of Trinity or that idea of compromise or middle ground, which actually then confirms this idea that the person goes idea, practicality, and can merge those things. The 3s are suggesting that the opposites of air and earth are well managed within this person. They're able to combine the opposites of air and earth well, whereas some other people may not be so good at combining those opposites, and it wouldn't show, or the situation is a combination of those two elements. So it wouldn't show the 3s, it would show maybe different numbers. Another interesting thing about the numbers is that if we look, yes, there are 4 cards, but there's actually only 3 numbers, and there's a relationship between those 3 numbers. If we ignore 1, 3, doesn't matter which 3, but if we ignore 1, 3, 3 and 5 add up to 8. So the 3s are kind of conspiring with the 5 to create an 8 there, which is kind of interesting. And we again then have, like the previous one, a double solidity, an 8, a cube. So from this idea that the person has, this plan that the person has, or the intelligence that the person has of Trinity, of movement, of compromise, they're able then to put that into a very solid state, a very practical state, a boxy state. Perhaps on the negative side, a person is so practical that the earth element boxes them in preventing change. But this is early in the reading. If this were if it were at the end instead, if we had that instead, then certainly I would say, idea, practical idea, we've got a box here. This is maybe, could be negative in the sense that it's creating stagnancy for the person. And even though it's an earth element, could be creating stagnancy for these two mental aspects. Or it could mean that the person is so good at creating stability, creating the pragmatic aspects of their thoughts, that the end of the story, the end of the situation, is a very practical and very stable situation. So we have the two different ideas happening. But this is what we had originally, so we'll continue on. So from that stability, 5 of thought. So maybe if the person does get stuck at this 8, their way out is a change of thought, a change in mind. Maybe a little bit of time is required, because 5s are about time, but it's usually not a long amount of time, and especially because it's air, which is fast. If it were a 5 of earth, it might suggest a long wait, a long amount of time before getting out of the 8. But in this case, because it's a 5 of air, 5s being change, air being quick, it's thinking outside the box. I know that sounds cliche, but that's kind of what it's saying in between there. And maybe there's something new to be learned. Some study is the way out of this stability, out of this stuckness here. I could probably say a couple more things, but they're escaping my mind right now. I'm apparently not at the 5 of air, so we'll move on to the 3 of earth. And so we come back to a stability and a practicality, which is confirmed by not only the 3, which is a stable-ish number, but also of the earth. So perhaps they're creating something new out of this stuckness and this new idea and these things that they've learned with the 5. They're creating some new kind of stability, a new thing, a third thing from the combination of 2 different things there. So I think that's giving you an idea of how the elements combine, how the minors can be read based on just number and just element. So next, the video next will be a little bit more on combining elements. We've had a little taste of it there through these cards, but we'll explore that a little bit more deeply, and we need to learn combining elements as we move into the quartz and the majors. So stay tuned for combining the elements.